Bruce DuMont back with Beyond the Beltway. We continue with hour number 2. Judith Sherwin joins me in studio. She's an adjunct professor at Loyola University. Richard Kling is sticking by for another 15 minutes. He is the criminal law professor at Chicago-Kent College of Law. We are also joined by Ray Hanania, a veteran reporter and a media critic, and we're going to continue our discussion with Richard Kling. Richard, one important thing, you said there was a number of things that you wanted to talk about, which is why you agreed to spend an extra 15 minutes with us. One thing that I didn't get to in hour number 1 was probably the most dramatic part of the trial, and that was when the defendant took the stand. And this is when Kyle Rittenhouse got very, very emotional. It was played, obviously, not only on the wall-to-wall coverage, but all the network news coverage carried the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse broke down during his testimony. How effective was that as a veteran defense attorney? How effective was that testimony by Kyle Rittenhouse?
I mean, realistically, it's always a scary proposition for a defense lawyer to put his or her client on the stand because of things that can happen, things that appear to be misconstrued, etc. I wasn't in the courtroom. I did, however, see parts of his testimony, and we watched him glance from side to side. Now, whether he was glancing at his lawyers to see how he was doing, I've had clients in the middle of their testimony, or at least witnesses in the middle of their testimony, who look over at the other lawyers to see is there some signal about what they should say. So I don't know. He was also looking at the jury. Obviously, the bottom line is whether the jury is going to believe that he was genuine or not. And even if he was genuine, even if he was sincere in his tears, one would expect that somebody who was on trial, where he may go to the penitentiary for a substantial period of his life, is going to be frightened. And it was a tense situation. Whether it was a situation of an innocent person who was just breaking down because he was wrongfully convicted, that's something the jury will have to decide.
My question to you, Ray Hanania, you're looking at sort of the media coverage. What was your reaction to that point in the trial, and also the way in which the news media responded to that dramatic moment?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it takes a lot of courage for a defendant to actually take the stand. So I think that plays to his benefit, that he wasn't, hiding, anything. A lot of people, the public, again, you have the right not to testify. But when you do testify in your own defense, I think the public, when they hear the arguments, that they give them a little more credibility. And I think personally, Kyle Rittenhouse did a good job of explaining, his actions and giving us a perspective that, honestly, I had never heard before. I'd never heard in the media that he'd been attacked. I'd never heard that the three victims, 2 that were killed and one that was wounded, had attacked him, had tried to take the gun, had made threats to him. But we heard everything about Rittenhouse. We heard that, this is a kid that wanted the limelight. This is a kid who went out of his way to be on the front lines. They talked about everything about Rittenhouse, but the media said nothing about the 3 victims. And I'm not saying anybody deserved to die in that confrontation. I think it's sad that 2 people died. That's terrible. But the hypocrisy, I think, is bigger on the media, that they're playing politics with this. This isn't about Kyle Rittenhouse or Joseph Rosenbaum or Anthony Huber, the third person. This is about the media using this to build up their base of support, because they know they're going to get 50% of the public, and they want them whipped up emotionally so they can sell newspapers. And I think that's a terrible injustice for this country.
Judith Sherwin, your response to the testimony first, and then to respond to what Ray said.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's always a big, scary situation when you take the defendant and put him on the witness stand. Most people will tell you not to do that. I read in a couple of places that what they were looking for here was a total acquittal, and that if they didn't think they could get it without putting him on, they thought he had the strength to go through it. I didn't see a person looking for approval on what he was doing on the witness stand. I mean, he really seemed to be so out of control he couldn't talk. and he was trying to get himself under control, which is why his head was moving around, and he was, I mean, he was, I thought he was pretty much out of control at that point in terms of being able to do anything. So, I mean, I don't see it as an act at all.
Did that emotional outburst, do you think that it led to the question by the judge several days later about whether or not there was some mental issues? Was there a connection between maybe the emotional breakdown and whether or not it's really impacted his mental health?
I don't think so. I think, as Richard said before, the judge has an obligation in all of these cases, any case, criminal case, to make sure that the defendant can cooperate, that the defendant is in the trial, they know what's going on. I don't think there's really been an issue about whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse knows what's happening or what his situation is. And I think the fact that he broke down on the witness stand, I mean, he looked to me like he was reliving everything that happened that night.
Yeah.
And that would be pretty scary.
Richard, I'm going to go back to you because you mentioned that there were several other things that you wanted to put on the record tonight, so we've got about 3 minutes left, so go ahead and open up.
I want to make one observation about his testimony. It's not a situation where the lawyer walked him into the courtroom and said, oh, by the way, go take a stand if you'd like to testify. If the lawyer did what they were supposed to do and they had a massive team of lawyers, they would have spent weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks preparing his testimony. They would have taken him through the direct examination over and over and again. They would have taken him through the cross-examination. So there were no surprises up there. And so realistically, that's why I say it was, and the jury will have to decide that, whether it was a genuine feeling on his part or whether or not it was a play for sympathy, and that's up to the jury to decide.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know why anybody would assume they didn't do precisely that. I am sure they prepared him for his testimony. I'm sure they prepared him for every conceivable issue that could be raised on cross. But you know, it's the same old story of you know how things are when you're rehearsing as to when you're actually doing it live.
Well, are you suggesting if they prepared him, do you think that they deliberately prepared him to have that sort of?
No, absolutely not. No. They prepared him.
So you don't think that happened during the preparation?
No.
Okay.
Well, I mean, he may have been upset during the preparation.
Yeah.
It's different when you're rehearsing in front of your two lawyers who are on your side and you're talking about what's going on, to sitting in a courtroom where you're trying to talk to 12 people and convince them that what you did was the right thing.
Richard, give us 30 seconds. So we got 30 seconds more for your input. Go ahead.
30 seconds more is if he spent time with his lawyers preparing, he was not spending time just explaining. When I spend time with my clients preparing them to testify, I am cross-examining them more violent, more vigorously than any prosecutor can be expected to cross-examine. So this wasn't a surprise where his lawyers just sat down with him in the sanctity of their office and said, okay, tell us what happened. I guarantee you that he would spend hours, if not weeks, with his lawyers rehearsing his testimony.
Richard Kling, we are out of
stand,
time. We will be back with our continued broadcast in just a moment. Thank you, Richard. Bruce DuMont back. Thanks very much for joining us. Ray Hanania, I want to turn to you for this segment primarily to talk more about the media aspect of this. Is there anything in this climate, is there anything that you think will change about the way media covers stories like this? Do we have any hope that things are going to get better?
No, I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. The media is not stupid. I was in the media for years. I know a lot of the reporters are good people. They're smart people. But they have jobs to do, and their policies are directed by their publishers and the 5 corporations that own the bulk of the media today. And I think that they see that society is divided politically. There's the people on the far right and the people on the far left, and very few people in the middle. There's a big gap between everybody. And I think they're pandering. I think the left media panders to the left, attacking the right. And I think that the right media is pandering to the right, attacking the left. Instead of getting professional news reporting, what we're getting is opinion in the disguise of being news. I think it's appalling. I mean, just this Rittenhouse case and the killing of these two protesters, I think, is a good example of what's wrong with the media. There are facts that are downplayed to promote one side. You know, the criminal histories of the two victims, and the three victims, the one that was wounded. Nobody ever said anything about that, and yet during the trial and in the media on the left, all we heard about was how Rittenberg, went out of his way to go to Kenosha. He inserted himself in there. He was trying to get headlines. So his past and everything about him made it into the press, but it took forever for us to learn about, Joseph Rosenbaum's problems, all the different problems that he had. Even Snoops.com, when you go on there to look to see, are these correct? They don't deny it. They just say, oh, this has nothing to do with the protests that took place in Kenosha. And I'm arguing that's not up to the media to tell me what's important. What the media should be doing is giving me and the public the facts, because the public is smart enough to understand it. But they're profiting from this divide, and they're keeping it alive.
Ray, a question here though: is the background of the three victims in this case, the two that died and the one that was just shot? Does the background of those three, is it really germane at all to this case?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell me why.
Absolutely, because it speaks to, were they protesting or were they rioting? Are these people that have a tendency to lean toward crime? These are issues that are being debated and discussed on the street, but not in the media. Even in the George Floyd case. Now, I don't want to see George Floyd killed. I think the police officers deserve to be punished. But instead of being punished, they were sentenced to how many years? First-degree murder? It's ridiculous. The guy had a criminal history. He had problems. And yet he's made out to be a saint. I think that's wrong. It influences how the public is responding. They're feeding this bias. In the Rittenhouse case, I think the victims, what they did in the past, portrays them as possibly people who would maybe go beyond what a normal protester should be doing and towards violence. It justifies Rittenhouse's claim that these guys tried to attack him, that Rosenbaum threatened him twice, said he was going to kill him. It makes it more believable when you see his background. So the public sanitized one side, the media sanitized one side, and exaggerated the other. I want
to bring Judith in. Judith, you're nodding your head as Ray was speaking.
Yeah, I mean, Ray is absolutely correct. I mean, the story put out here is that Rittenhouse is a proud boy. He's a bad kid. Obviously he had a gun when he shouldn't have had a gun in Wisconsin. All right, that is a criminal offense.
Is a picture with the Proud Boys? Is that germane to this case?
Well, I don't know whether it is or it isn't. I don't think it is. The judge clearly didn't think it was, and the judge. I mean, there was a riot going on.
Yes.
Regular protesters don't set gas stations on fire. They don't pick up their skateboards, as has happened several times. One time, prominently in I think it was New Orleans, it was somewhere in the South, one of these peaceful protesters picked up his skateboard and beat a man to death with it, okay? And that's happened in several instances. And people know about that. So here comes this Huber with his skateboard, and he's trying to hit Rittenhouse in the head with it and take his gun away. What's he supposed to do? Is he supposed to say, "Oh, gee whiz, don't do that"? I mean, this is insanity. Okay.
How
so
do we?
Somebody has
How
to
do
deal
we?
with it.
How do we? And when I say we, I mean myself, who has a microphone once a week and a website and everything else, and all the people like me that have similar mouthpieces or opportunities or public platforms to address the public. Whether we have a political axe to grind or not, I don't particularly have an axe to grind. I want to get to the truth, the whole truth. I want to know these things earlier in the trial. I also know that we're never going to get instant reaction or instant background on these cases, because the media wants to go with what do we know, what's new that we can add to this right now. It's not. So my question is there anything, including yourself, including Richard Kling, including Ray, is there anything we could be doing about basically jumping on the next big case that comes along and says, wait a minute, time out. Let's not have another Rittenhouse here.
Well, let's not
and get some publicity for
let's not have another rush to judgment. Okay, I understand clicks are money. You know, they want clicks. They want people to get on their website. But, you know, if the media is whipping up a frenzy over this trial, okay, when Anderson Cooper has the young man who was shot in the arm.
Huber's
Huber's
no, that's
dead.
the other one. That's no.
But Greg, I can't never pronounce his last name. But when the young man who was shot in the arm goes on CNN and says to the world, he shot me when I had my hands in the air, and that is absolutely not what he said on the witness stand. That is absolutely not what's going on in the court. So if that comes in as a not guilty, and if the other charges come in as a not guilty, you are going to have a repeat of what you had in Kenosha, you know, in 2020. And the media is responsible for that. They've got to stop whipping this up.
Ray, do you believe
the media wants that?
Okay.
I agree with Judith.
It's another
the media
story.
wants that.
It's another
the media
story.
wants the reaction. I think she's right about everything that she said. And, you know, you asked, was Rittenhouse's background about being, you know, sympathetic or whatever with the Proud Boys, was it germane? The media made it germane through the whole time since this event took place until now. What they didn't make germane was the balance on the other side.
Right.
We need news. We need real reporters to report the news and stop taking positions. That's what we're missing. We're not getting that today. And I'm not talking about opinionated people like me or you or others. I'm talking about the news reporters.
There are
They're
no
not
news
reporting
reporters.
the news.
There are no news reporters anymore. They all have opinions, and they have to thrust them upon you, you know, with the 6 o'clock news or whatever it is they're doing, and their Twitter accounts. I mean, it's killing this country.
It has to be news reported by people who work for networks who have decided what their political slant is going to be.
Right. Well, look,
and insofar as the mainstream media, which to me is still, you know, channels, you know, or NBC, CBS, and ABC.
Right.
I would include, I guess, the more partisan, websites. But again, in those particular cases, I think they decided long ago. They decided, you know, when Donald Trump got elected, you know, they want to sell soap. They're trying to sell product. They're looking for the maximum number of eyeballs. And if somebody wins an election, they look at those people, and they look at the demographics.
Right.
And many of them don't want the demographics of Donald Trump. They don't want his demographics.
Well, but I'll tell you something. Go ahead, Ray. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Judith.
No, go ahead, Ray.
No, I'm sorry, Judith. You go ahead.
Okay.
All right. I was just going to say that the media is using different lexicon for different sides of politics. It's a protest when it's on the left. It's a riot when it's on the right.
Right.
It's a justified expression of anger when it's on the left. It's an insurrection when it's on the right.
Right.
You know, I am not a right-wing conservative. I'm right in the middle. I sympathize with, I see some of the right-wing media doing the exact same thing that the left-wing media is doing. But the reporting that we're seeing, the majority of the reporting is parsing those words. And they're applying it when it suits a political side. And I think that is unjournalistic, it's unethical, and they're contributing to the violence that's taking place in this country.
I agree.
And
I agree
again,
100%.
the indictment of Steve Bannon is a good example of how media left of center and right of center are responding to this story. Give me 10 seconds on the indictment right now, Ray. 10 seconds on the indictment.
Listen, I personally, I think if I were him, I would just go ahead and provide whatever information they want, because I don't believe in, when you really review it, that anybody said we're going to throw out the government using violence. I think this was a protest gone wrong on January 7th.
Judith, 10 seconds to
maybe
you. We've only got 10
members,
seconds.
What was the legitimate
10
thing?
seconds.
10
went
seconds.
wrong. But I
We
think
gotta
should
stop.
just go ahead and give the information.
He jumped into your 10 seconds.
He did.
We'll give it to you after the break. I'm
Thank
Bruce
you.
DuMont.
I'm sorry, Judith.
That's
No, it's
okay.
okay, Ray. It's
Sure,
okay.
sure. Ladies first.
Sexist.
Bruce DuMont back. We're going to give Judy Sherwin 10 seconds to respond to the question, and I'll be the countdown. Go ahead.
Oh, God. All right. So, as far as Steve Bannon is concerned, if somebody serves you with a subpoena to talk to the House of Representatives and you don't want to go, you file a lawsuit, and it's called a motion to quash, and you try to stop it that way in the federal court. The other thing is Steve Bannon cannot possibly have executive privilege about something he said on the radio on January 5th.
Right.
That's what they want to talk to him about. It's completely ridiculous, and it demeans the whole idea of executive privilege, which is a real thing with the president's communications. with
And
people.
we'll talk more about that next week as this show continues and as that issue will continue. Joining us now from New York City is Rudolph Hall. He is, for over 20 years, was an officer with the New York Police Department, and he was a guest on this program several months ago because he's very involved in police reform efforts around the United States, and we invited him to join our other guests this evening, Ray Hanania and Judith in studio, to bring us the New York perspective about what's happening in New York City, and two things. The crime wave in New York City, that's one thing we want to get Rudy's response to. Two, the new mayor, Eric Adams, a former police officer. And number three, the debate that's already going on with the leader of Black Lives Matter, who is challenging the new African-American mayor of New York, who wants to reimpose plainclothes police units to stop crime. And the leader of BLM thinks that is a racist move, and he has threatened a potential violence in New York City if Eric Adams proceeds with that. So that's the setup. There's about 5 or 6 questions in there, Rudy. But let me begin by asking the question about violence in New York City. It's getting a lot more coverage on national exposure, national media. How bad is it at the moment? Compare it with the previous influx of crime in the Big Apple.
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me. I'm happy to be able to join you again.
Good.
And welcome to your guests. Listen, this is a serious issue. We have seen an increase in violence across the city, as well as other cities across the United States. This is not just a New York City problem. I think there's a wide host of factors that played into the increased violence. We're seeing a lot of violence among young people. I mean, 13, 14, 15-year-olds who are often involved in gangs. One of the unique challenges for police agencies in New York City and beyond is the changing dynamics of gang activity, which drives a lot of the violence. In years past, there was more of an organization where there was someone at the top, and then they had lieutenants underneath them, and they kind of controlled the organization in a sense. Where now you're starting to see more groups of young people who form a gang because they grew up on the same street, and there's really no order to their behavior. There's really no rules that guide what they will and won't do, right? And we're dealing with young people who are often not mature enough to make intelligent decisions, and those decisions are leading to significant consequences with oftentimes young people who are not even part of the conflict who are being injured, in some cases killed.
Mm-hmm. And point two, tell us more about the new mayor-elect, Eric Adams. You're a longtime police officer. He was a longtime police officer. Did you guys ever cross paths? And what's your opinion of the new mayor-elect of New York City?
Right. So Mayor-elect Adams, he was, I believe, a lieutenant when I started out in my career. So we crossed paths briefly. I've never had the opportunity to work directly with him. I think there's optimism that he will bring, if I'll say from the police perspective, there's some optimism that he will bring an understanding of what's needed in law enforcement to address some of the violence. I think he has an extremely difficult job because he made a comment the other day in the news that I'm not the Messiah, but I am the mayor of New York City, which is true. He's not going to come in and solve all the problems of the city and every community because he has a wide host of issues that he has to address from his position. But I think there is some optimism that his administration can make some significant changes in improving the conditions and the quality of life in New York City.
What is the controversy about the plainclothes crime unit? And why was it closed down, and why does he want to bring it back?
Right. So the unit that we're referring to is called anti-crime. Anti-crime and street crime units have been part of the police department going back to the early 70s under the Lindsay mayoral administration. And these are officers who work in plainclothes. Just to clarify for your audience, oftentimes I hear people say, well, they're undercovers. These are not undercover officers. These are officers who identify themselves as police officers, unlike an undercover detective would, but they wear plainclothes doing proactive enforcement. The majority of a uniform patrol force is reactive, meaning that someone gets robbed, someone's assaulted, they call 911, uniformed police officers show up and take a report and hopefully try to find the suspect. Your proactive units are actively engaging with suspects before they commit that crime or right after they committed that crime, which makes the work that they do extremely dangerous and high risk. In New York City, before I say my next comment, let me clear up one other thing. I often hear people say a stop, question, and frisk is outlawed. It's not allowed anymore. That is not true. Stop, question, and frisk is based on a United States Supreme Court from 1968, Supreme case, from 1968, Terry v. Ohio. That case set a precedent for what police officers can do at less than probable cause. Meaning if I have reasonable suspicion you're about to commit a crime, you're in the process of committing a crime, or you just committed a crime, I can stop you and temporarily detain you, possibly frisk you, depending on the circumstances. Now, moving that forward to New York City.
Let me ask one follow-up. Let me ask one follow-up question, Rudolph. Does the term TAC unit, which is a term that is used in police departments around the United States, I believe, including in Chicago, is the TAC unit just a different name for the plainclothes officers who are actively and aggressively pursuing crime before it happens and after it happens? Is it just a different name?
Every agency, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bruce.
Is it just a different name for what the unit does?
So I'm hesitant to say that it's the same in every agency because some departments have gang units which do similar work. They may call it a TAC unit. In New York City, we call it anti-crime or street crime units.
Okay.
In theory, they are doing the same type of work, right? The name may change depending on the police department, but most of your larger departments will have some type of proactive enforcement.
Okay. And tell us about why many in New York, at least in the African American community associated with Black Lives Matter, why are they so upset that this unit might come back? Is it the aggressive police nature of them, or does this unit have a bad track record insofar as police community relations in the black communities of New York?
Right. So the track record for these units has been one of it's multifaceted because they've done some outstanding work removing illegal firearms off the streets of New York City, which in essence have saved thousands, if not millions, of lives. Whether it's the life of someone who could have become a victim or a young person who may have shot someone and ended up going to jail for the rest of their life. Those lives were saved, and that's a reality. Unfortunately, it's not a quantitative number that we can point to, right? If you're a criminal and you don't carry your gun because you think you may get stopped by the police and frisked, so you say, I'm going to leave my gun at home. Well, you didn't get arrested, which has a positive impact on your life, and you didn't shoot and kill someone, which saved another life. Those are real byproducts from the work that these units did. The problem was the NYPD, and I suspect many other agencies, failed to properly train these officers before putting them out on the street. And I will tell you, for over half of my career, about 12 years, I was involved in doing proactive policing, whether it was as a police officer or the detective bureau or as a supervisor, as a sergeant. And oftentimes you would have young officers who were energetic, want to fight crime, and they're identified by a supervisor or someone within the command structure who says, hey, this guy is a good cop, let's put him in anti-crime. And there was no formalized training. So this young officer who may have 2 or 3 years on the job, who was working in patrol in uniform yesterday, today he's working in plainclothes. We hope that he ends up on a team with a supervisor who has experience, as well as fellow partners who have a lot of experience that he or she can learn from. But in a lot of cases, they're on a team with other officers who have the same amount of time that they do, and we're putting them out into the street and doing high-risk work, right? So it's easy to respond to a call and have a complaint and say, I was just robbed. The guy across the street, the red shirt, he's the one that robbed me. Well, now you can go grab that person and arrest him. It's much harder to explain, well, why did you stop this person who was walking down the street, who hadn't committed a crime? Why did you stop them? Why did you frisk them? How did you recover his gun from them? And we did not prepare these officers to do that kind of work. And it's within the culture of the police department, it was a notion of, well, we got a gun off the street. But we never talked about, did we actually get a conviction, right? Did we get an indictment in grand jury?
Let me ask one follow-up question. I have heard from many interviews that I've done with veteran police officers, over the last 30 years. They have described the activity of the TAC officer, who are they're the young gung-ho just out of the academy. And what I've heard is that when they go into a high crime area and that gets identified and moved from week to week, they go in and they shake everything up. They bust buttons, turn over tables, and they really make they make a stink, and then they leave, and it's left to other cops to try to clean up their mess. I want to get your reaction to that when we come back. Bruce DuMont back, and a question to Rudy. Before the break, Rudy, I asked a question based on information that I received, over the last, decades from police officers I know, that this aggressive unit, when they go into a neighborhood, they shake things up. Maybe they stop crime, but they certainly shake up and they disrupt the relationship between the police and the community. And then they move on to someplace else, and they've left this residual of resentment. Is there any truth to that scenario?
Whoever your source is absolutely correct.
Okay.
There's a lot of truth to that.
All right.
One back to my point I made in the last segment. The officers that are often put into these units are young, aggressive, and looking to fight crime.
Yeah.
When you get older, you learn more of that balance of communication, right? How to talk to people, how to let them vent a little bit before you have to take some kind of police action. With officers in some of these units, and especially if you're in plain clothes and you stop someone, and this is one of the complaints of the African American and Latino communities in New York City. I'm walking down the street, 3 guys jump out of an unmarked car, grab me, put their hands on me. Don't explain why they stopped me. I didn't have a weapon on me. And they put their hands on my body, frisk me, and jump back in the car and drive off. There's no name tag on their clothing that identifies who they are. They may have had a shield around their neck, but you can't even see the shield number. And they jump in the car and they drive off. And now, as a citizen, you feel victimized. So it drives the complaints of people in the community who are worried about anti-crime teams being brought back into the fight against crime in New York City. And it's a relevant and realistic complaint because it did happen, and I saw it firsthand. I think the problem is, which I was listening to part of the program early before I jumped in. I think Ray had talked about this with the media, right? In the left and the right, and we lost a balance in the center. We can still do proactive enforcement, but let's make sure our officers are actually trained to do the enforcement, as opposed to just picking people because someone made a lot of arrests. If you made a lot of arrests, how many of those arrests actually led to convictions, right? If 75% would decline to prosecute, then maybe you're not doing a good job, right? And holding people accountable when an officer does something wrong, hold that officer accountable, as opposed to saying we have to get rid of the entire unit. So I think if Mayor Adams can find that balance along with whoever the police commissioner will be, I think that'll go a long way to fighting crime and restoring some of the trust back in the police department by members of the community as well.
Ray, did you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, well, first I want to say hi to Dr. Hall and urge him to please tell Mayor-elect Adams not to reach out to the mayor of Chicago to ask for advice, okay, on how to fight crime. But you do not want what's happening here, which is far worse than New York. Right. All I'd like to say is that I think it's the intent. I remember I had served during the Vietnam War. As soon as I got out, I started publishing an Arab American newspaper. For 2 years after that, even though I had a security clearance, the FBI investigated me, wasted $1 million because they believed that I was somehow involved in terrorism. Well, I would have welcomed that investigation because the end of the report, 40 pages, said Ray Hanania is a person who's concerned about his community, wants to do good for the community, but please don't talk to him because he's a reporter. He might write about this. I wish they had made that public. The problem is what they do with the information. They went to people and said I was a terrorist. They went to people to prevent me from getting jobs. It's how the police use information that becomes the problem, not the fact that they're investigating crime. Go ahead, stop and frisk people if you suspect that they have a gun or they're involved in something, but don't use that to, push some kind of agenda to make someone look bad. I think that's where the problem starts. I support the police 100%, and while I didn't like being investigated, I wish they would have made it public. It would have made me look far better than I was back then.
Judith, your comment to what Rudolph was talking about?
Right. Yes, good evening, Rudy. Thanks for your insights into what's going on. I mean, we've had similar problems here with the gangs because the city thought in its infinite wisdom, and this is even pre our current mayor, that if they cut off the head of the gangs, everything would be fine and they would all just melt away into the night. And in fact, it's just spawned a gang for every block. The question I would have, though, so these officers, we have a situation now where every uniformed policeman is wearing body cams. There's no, I assume, equivalent situation for these plainclothes officers.
Is that right, Rudy? They don't wear body cam,
or do they?
No. So in New York City, they actually do wear body cams. Actually, my dissertation topic was on the effect of body cameras on these specialized plainclothes police officers.
Oh, okay.
And what did your dissertation show? What did it prove?
So identify that there was a hesitancy. Initially, there was a hesitancy amongst officers who worked in these anti-crime units to wear body cameras.
Right.
One of the major concerns was there's a lot of policing. You have discretion, right? Outside of certain limited circumstances, you have discretion when to make an arrest and when not to. One of the concerns was they're out looking for people committing serious crimes, like these felonies and felony crimes. Shootings, carrying guns, selling major drugs. One of the concerns they had were, well, if I stop someone who's smoking weed, and this is before weed was legalized in New York State. If I spoke to someone who's smoking weed, which at the time was a misdemeanor crime, and it's a kid who's 17, I don't want to arrest them. So ordinarily, I would tell him, all right, you got no weapons on you, you can get out of here. Well, now if I let him go and something else, he gets involved in something else, whether he's a victim or he's a perpetrator. Am I in trouble now? Because on camera, I didn't arrest this person when I technically could have and maybe should have, but I didn't. And so that discretion they were worried about. They also were concerned about the subjective view, right? So if I'm a supervisor watching your body camera and I see you stop someone and you frisk them, you may have saw something that the camera didn't capture. But now I'm just watching your video and I'm making a decision or interpreting your behavior, which I may be incorrect, right? Because I'm just looking at a video.
Rudy, I do have to pause. We are out of time for the broadcast. Rudy Hall, a veteran New York City police officer, joining us with his perspective. Thanks very much, Rudy. Judith Sherwin, thank you very much. And also Ray Hanania, thank you very much for joining us as well. This program is produced by Jenny B. Production. Fritz Goldman has been running the board tonight. Fritz, nice to have you with us.